Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Norcross. I live out in Tampa, and David asked me a little bit ago to come on out and chat with you all about plugins. I'm a WordPress developer. I've been for close to 8 years now. I run a company along with my wife over there and another business partner who's in Indiana. We focus on custom plugins for clients, full-scale development builds that are technically themes, but there's really just a design layer on top of some really abstract functionality. And we also have some commercial products out, along with various other little things here and there. Core contributor released, there's about 35 plugins in the repository, I think. God knows how much on GitHub that I never properly packaged to push up. And we have in addition to some other ones, we have a very large plugin intended for Genesis users that provides a design interface for child themes. So I've done a lot of stuff pretty much on the entire spectrum of what you would do in a plugin. And this being the quote unquote business of plugins, a lot of people, when you think business of plugins, you immediately think commercial. And that has not been my experience. Now, there are anything to do with a plugin, there's going to be three parts. There's actually building it, there's marketing it, and then there's supporting it. Most people, myself included, always assumed that it kind of went in that order. Focus your attention on building it, make it the best of whatever it can be, then kind of muddle your way through marketing it, or find somebody who's good at marketing and have them market it. And then you support it, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I built something that's very, very good. Clearly, the support won't be all that much. That's a wrong assumption every single time. It doesn't really matter how good it is. There will be support questions from every angle. So it almost works backwards. Yeah, I would say it's a toss-up between marketing and support as to which is going to be the most time-intensive and also the most important. Building it is the easiest. I could, and I'm sure there's other people in this room, but I could build a plugin and have it released during this meetup. Like, that part is not that hard. I mean, anyone who's done any sort of development work, you have code that you've written for a client. It's probably sitting on their site along with, probably in a folder somewhere on your computer. With an hour of work, you could package that into a plugin and have it released, whether on the repository or someplace like GitHub. It's not, the amount of work. Now, if you want to start with like a different idea and kind of go forward, then that's a little bit different. But for the most part, building it's not that hard. Building it well, I mean, that goes along, that's a whole other topic, frankly, but the idea that building the plugin is hard is a big fallacy, because the idea is if you're good enough to build a plugin, the code is probably good enough to at least get rolling. The place where people get tripped up is they either think, I have to solve a problem that hasn't been solved before, and that's wrong. There are very, very few areas in the WordPress plugin space that have not been solved in some capacity. The only thing off the top of my head that I can think of that I haven't seen a solid, good solution is appointment setting. And because there's so many things involved with that, and two people would never use it the same way, like, I get why it hasn't happened. But other than that, I mean, Dave, can you think of any other problem that has not at least been addressed? Not addressed well, addressed.
No, I can think of addressed well.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, is that it's not that you have to find something that hasn't been done. You just need to do it better or differently or solve it in a different way. I mean, you think of e-commerce. There's a handful of large ones out there. God knows how many other small ones. They all have their own problems. They all do something well. Some do other things better than others. Some do more things better than others. But iTheme 6 months ago released, or a year ago released another online digital e-commerce solution, even though EDD existed. I use EDD for stuff. I love it, but every time he releases something, I find a weird bug. And Pippin's a great developer. So the whole idea is that you need to solve it in a way that either someone hasn't solved it yet, or to find a subset of people using it who it's not working for them. Look at some popular stuff that's out there, see how people are doing it, see where the pain points are. Look for something that's been out for a long time, because most likely they have a whole lot of legacy code. that they have to account for. Thinking about e-commerce again, there's WP e-commerce. They've been out forever. 2.5, maybe, even prior. I mean, before custom post types, before taxonomies, before a lot of things that we just now take for granted in WordPress that have been there for years. So they have been slowly trying to get rid of all that crap code. They had to make all of this crazy custom stuff to do things that WordPress didn't do yet. So someone coming into the space right now wouldn't even have to worry about that because no one is using something they haven't written yet. So they don't have to worry about supporting something that existed 2 years ago or 4 or 6 years ago in their case. And that's where you see a lot of places, people have problems is that, they're supporting all this backwards compatibility and all that. So people can come into the space where there is an existing established product. If it's been around long enough, there are people that hate it. In the same regard that there are people that love it and will swear by it and will recommend it to everybody they know, there are people who cannot wait to jump in on a forum, on Twitter, somewhere else and say, that's terrible, don't ever go anywhere near that, that broke my internet. Whatever their problem was, they will take that and extrapolate it into it's the worst code that's ever been written. I can't believe it's still in public. So you solve it differently. You need to look at what is available for free. Especially if you're going on the commercial side. If you're going to release something for free, if there's already 20 of them, who cares? Go ahead and release it. I mean, there are, 1,000 social sharing plugins, give or take. Hell, I wrote one like 4 years ago. Apparently there's room for more because people keep writing them and people keep using them. It's not anything that I would say people would ever pay money for because there's so many of them for free. But if you are looking in the commercial space, then you need to look at what's available for free and what are you offering that a free plugin isn't going to give them. And that's where the marketing and support comes in because usually it's not functionality. Maybe you can add a little something that they don't do, or maybe you can package it in a different way or make it a little bit easier to use. But you're probably not going to make the functionality drastically different to the point where someone's going to look at the free one and be like, oh, this is so much better, I'm clearly going to pay for this. There are some people who will look for paid solutions first. These people usually have had enough experience with free plugins that they couldn't get support, and it caused them problems that they were like, I would rather pay for something and have a better chance of getting support. There's not a 100% guarantee, but usually you're going to get support if you're paying for it, especially if it's from a larger, more well-known developer or company. But supporting something is extremely difficult. There's a plugin that I wrote, it was my first real plugin. Like I had released 1 or 2 before that were just really weird, kind of one-off, just kind of getting used to the idea. And it handles FAQs. Basic idea, this was not long after custom post types came out, so I was able to use those. I built it for a client, I'm like, this is actually useful. I had to build it because I couldn't find anything that worked and worked the way I wanted it to. So I released it. 1 or 2 little bug fixes, a support question here or there. Then I started getting I would love it to do this. And I didn't know any better. Okay, code it up, push it out. I would like it to do this. And before I knew it, I now have a plugin that I don't know how to fix anymore. I want to rewrite it. I've wanted to rewrite it for probably close to a year now. But I don't know how to rewrite it and not break everybody that's using it. And there's been about 60,000 people that have downloaded it. And I don't know how to deal with 60,000 people that get upset if I break something. I don't want to know how to deal with 60,000 people who work with something that I've broken. And obviously the 60,000 downloads, that's not active people, but from what I understand, there's still about 20,000 people that are using it on their site today. And so doing so, like I painted myself in a corner. I started adding these little features and that 1 or 2 people would ask for, instead of doing something like adding a filter. Who here is familiar with hooks and filters? Yeah. And let me take a step back. Who has heard the whole idea of decisions, not options? That's a WordPress mantra is decisions, not options. Is you make a choice. This is how it's going to work. The second line to that statement that never really comes up is, but you give people who are smart enough to know better the ability to change it. And that's not a knock on anybody other than you don't want you've seen some of those themes that have like 14 tab settings for everything under the sun, and you don't know where to find the two things you want to change, you start adding hooks and filters. Simple things. If you have a setting that is for example, on that FAQ, I added a feature where it would expand collapse. So you could have a list of all the titles, you click one and it'll expand and show the answer. Stupid simple, little, 9 lines of jQuery. Well, I added a setting for the speed in which it would come down. Now that is a very basic setting, and my feeling is that 99% of people using it, if not more, have never changed that setting. Only 1 or 2 people might ever want to change that setting. It's 700 milliseconds. I don't know how many people really care about, it's got to be 900. I can't believe you made that 700. A filter would have made that incredibly easy for me to say, for the one person that asks, here you go. It's 1 line, change it to 900, you're done. That addresses the people that want something slightly different than what you've done without you having to keep adding and adding and adding to it to accommodate all these people, because people will always ask for something different. They will take your solution and be like, it would be great if it did X. Regardless if you ever intended it to do that, if it ever should do that. I had people using that, again, that FAQ manager, I had people using that for not using for frequently asked questions. They liked the way that it was structured. And I get that, but then they would ask questions like, well, I wish it did this. I'm like, well, that has nothing to do with any questions and answers. It was something like product page. It was the strangest thing it was like 3 years ago. I can't remember the details, but what it came down to was, people are going to ask for things that don't make any sense. And from a support perspective, you have to weigh, is it worth even addressing this? Is it worth actually making this available? If I'm building anything now, anytime I come up to a point where I need to make a decision, or there is an option that could be available, it's a filter. I make the decision, I add the ability for someone else to make their own decision. For the people that need to make a decision and have the ability and want to, it's very easy for them to do. For people who don't and don't care, they don't install something and all of a sudden see a settings page with 25 settings. That will turn a user off before it makes them happy. The people that want 25 different options, they probably have the ability to make those changes in a programmatic way. The idea from there is, and the better thing, frankly, which I've been doing now, because we release commercial plugins that obviously take a bulk of our time. Marketing them and supporting them, I'm going to get into that in a second. So if you want to start getting in the space of releasing plugins, I would start with free, and I would solve one thing. Look at one action that you wish was done a different way. It's not a full suite solution to handle a whole range of problems. I released a plugin about a year ago that all it does, if you go in the medium, they're changing it in 4.0, so it's probably going to be irrelevant, but it used to be when you went, you go in the media library, you have all your stuff listed kind of like posts, but not really. To get the URL of the actual image, you have to click the image, then go to the right, find the field, which is truncated because it's a sidebar item, and then highlight that, copy it, and go. I was building something for a client where we had to do that about 350 times. And I didn't want to do that 350 times because I'm lazy. So I built a small thing, it added a little thing, you clicked it, and it expanded the URL right below it. That is all it did. One thing. That way, any question, you pretty much cut out the idea of, I wish it did this. It either does what it does, or it does this thing for you, or you have no need for it. It doesn't almost do what you want. When you start adding that gray area of this almost does what I want, that's where all those questions come in, because people try to use it in a way that you didn't intend. Then if you make a single-use plugin, or single-point plugin, I call it, either people will use it because that solves a problem they have, or they'll ignore it because it doesn't solve a problem they have. Look at how you're using WordPress often. I would hope you're here. If not, I don't know why it's Saturday morning. I'm sure there's something else going on. But figure out the one thing that you have to do that's tedious, that is annoying. That you're like, this is one too many steps or one too many clicks. And figure out how to make that one thing easier. Just about every part of the admin UI is filterable. You can add columns, you can add items when you hover over a post, those little links below, you can add things there. You can take things out. You can add new columns, you can add new sidebars, so you can add, you can pick and choose and mold stuff pretty much any way you want. Find the one thing, figure out how to write that, solve that problem, and then find another one. If you're not comfortable putting it on the repository, put it on GitHub. What I found is for the stuff that I like putting stuff on GitHub a lot, because usually people are developer minded. Maybe they're not developers, but they're more development minded if they're even on GitHub. So usually the questions I get are more in line with, hey, on line 42, this is doing something weird. Or I found a bug, here's the fix, and they'll hand me, they'll give me the code to fix it at the same time they're reporting the problem. I will take those support questions all day long. But getting in the commercial space, that plugin that I mentioned earlier is large. I built one about 2.5 years ago that was a very, very slimmed down version of what it is now. I built it because I had to build it for a client, and I decided I'll just package it and release it, and kind of forgot about it. Genesis made, Genesis made a bunch of changes, when they released their new version and added a lot of different markup. My old version wouldn't work anymore because it was tied to the HTML that was used. So I took that as the opportunity to build a new one. And by this point, I had released a handful of commercial stuff, and I immediately knew that there would be a lot of support with this, because the plugin was focused on end users. End users generally create more support simply because they're not developers. And as developers, we need to remember that they are not us. They don't do what we do. They have their own jobs, their own lives, their own skills. They're not stupid. Most of them. Just like they're stupid developers. It doesn't matter. But the fact that they are a user does not make them stupid. The fact that they're a user means that they are not a developer. And once I got it through my head that they shouldn't understand what I do, because that's not their job. I don't sit there, if I have a plumber over the house, I don't sit over his shoulder and tell him how to fix my sink. I don't know how to fix my sink. That's why he's there. I don't tell him, I had a nephew that unclogged a sink once. None of my experience is relevant to him fixing the sink. And so I need to remember that what they do is something else. And I need to be nice, which I'm not always good at. I'll be the first to admit I can be a little callous at times. I try not to be with users, though. That's usually only with other developers. And I also need to remember that the language that I use in terms of how I'm explaining things. I can't just start throwing out code jargon and expect them to understand what I'm talking about. But when I was building this thing, it took probably 3-4 months, maybe a little bit more, to get it to a releasable state. And when I say releasable, I mean that something that if I put it out in the wild and started asking people to give me money for it, they weren't going to turn right around and say, I can't believe you just asked me to give you money for this. And so what I had to do was I had to take a step back and figure out, what do people want to use this for? What problem am I solving? And in this case, my whole thing was, I thought there was a very large gap between people that were happy taking a child theme right off the shelf, installing it and being done with it, and people that were paying a developer or designer to put together a full custom site. I felt that there was a gap in between that people just kind of wanted to change up some colors, maybe a little bit of font here and there, but they didn't want to completely rebuild it, and they didn't want it just to keep it plain. And so I'm like, okay, those are the people that I want to target. What do I need to give them to solve their problem? Because it's very easy for me as a developer to want to solve every possible problem that might arise at some point by some person who has never used it, may never use it. It was a matter of finding focus, because once I found focus, then I could actually build it. I could say, does this match the focus, yes or no? Build it. Is this something, I would constantly have other people look at it as I was building it. I wouldn't wait until the very end, because once I've built it and I think I'm done, and if I show it to someone and hey, what do you think? Oh, well, this, and this. I'm probably going to just ignore what they say, because I'm going to be oh, well, I've already built that. I'm not going to go back. Or you had no idea how long it took me to do this. Or it's oh, that powers everything else. I can't change that. So I would have people kind of look at it almost every step along the way. And in doing so, there was actually 2 or 3 things that were caught, and I did a different way that have saved me a lot of time now. But in the marketing and support space, it's support fuels marketing, marketing fuels support. Now, I'm not a marketing person. I don't like marketing. I'm not good at it. It makes me uncomfortable. I'm good at writing code, releasing code, and going about my day. That's what I like to do. Fortunately, there are other people who are really good at marketing. They like marketing things. And I am all for those people doing those things. And what we have done is two-part. One, we've actually partnered up with StudioPress as a company, and that's been really cool. But also, I found people who were good at telling a story. I found people that were good at talking to the people that I wanted to use this, and I wanted to be, involved. Again, like I said, I had a focus. So what I needed to do was, I didn't know how to market to that focus. I still don't know how to market to that focus. I know people who know how to market to that focus. And there are a handful of people out there who are really good developers and really good marketers. I don't know, 4, 5 people maybe. And usually they're really good at one and then adequate at another. So it was a matter of finding someone who's good at that, finding out how to market to them. And then whatever message is being marketed, it has to be what the thing actually does. Because I've seen a lot of times where the marketing copy doesn't match what actually the product does. So you buy something because it says XYZ, and you're really stoked because you can't wait to do XYZ with this new thing that you bought, and you load it up and you realize that it does X, maybe kind of does Y if you want to do Y this certain way and only this certain way, and Z is the theory. Like, yeah, we think maybe it can do this, but Z doesn't actually exist yet. And so now you're upset because you paid money, and you're like, do I feel like going through the hassle of asking for a refund, which may or may not be a long a thing? Do I just deal with it and just hopefully it'll get better over time? Usually those are the two ideas. Like, do I get my money back or do I just deal with it? And now what you've done is you've most likely created support and but usually they're going to put in a ticket first to be like, I can't seem to do X or Z properly. And then that's when you have to say, it doesn't really do Z and it does R. But R and Z are pretty close, so we'll go with that. The idea that, and then now you have someone who's upset. You're spending time supporting them and not building things. Your marketing is now wrong. And now those are the people that become the people who will go online and tell people that your thing is garbage because you've sold them something that doesn't exist. Yeah. And if your marketing is, and again, and I preface this by saying I am not a marketing person, so I trust the people that are involved with that they are doing what the right thing, that it does what it says it does, and it does, and in my opinion, it does it well, but it does what it says it does. It doesn't, I don't say that it does anything else. I don't allude to the fact that it does something else. I don't show pictures of things that it doesn't do. In our case, we set up a live demo. People can go to a site and actually use the thing that they could possibly buy. Here's exactly what it does. Not in fancy marketing terms, not in pictures. It's like you can go click things and find out if this is actually, and we've actually gotten feedback that we tweaked some of the marketing, some of the stuff on the site because the way that we said it didn't match how it was actually used. It was more language than anything else, but it was enough to where people were like, well, it said this, but it only did this. Or you said it did it this way and it does it this way. And we agree because frankly, they're the ones that are going to use it. Their opinion matters more than mine. Once I release something, once something is out, either in kind of in the free, but especially in the commercial space, you as the developer are no longer solely in charge of the direction anymore. Yes, you should be the most important person involved because at the end of the day, you're the one building it and it's your product. But get a version out that is usable. Figure out how people are actually going to use it because almost everything I've ever released, I have an idea of how people are going to use it and then I see what people actually do it for. Sometimes that matches, usually it doesn't. And figure out what they're using it for. If everyone who uses your thing does a certain, wants to do a certain action, it's probably worth making sure that it does that action really well. If nobody uses a functionality that you've added, maybe don't add it. maybe take it out, maybe turn it into something, like a hook or a filter, or maybe make it an add-on. One of the things that's happening now that I really love is people are building plugins, and then they're building small add-on plugins. So if there's functionality that 10% of the people are going to want, you don't add it into the core plugin. You want to keep, just like WordPress strives to keep core as lean as possible, you want to keep your plugins as lean as possible. If there's going to be this 10% of people doing a certain thing, make a small add-on plugin that addresses those 10% of people. Either A, it's a chance to increase revenue if you're going to sell it, or heck, put it out for free. With that design plugin, one of the things is I kept the font stack, the available fonts, to a minimum. I didn't want to be loading a whole lot of fonts, because there's a whole lot of reasons why. But so I made a small add-on plugin that adds about 35 or 40 Google fonts. People said, hey, I want to use Google fonts, and totally cool with that. Now there's 640-ish at the last count Google fonts. I clearly cannot add 640 fonts into anything, not without it becoming incredibly weighted and difficult to use, and I don't know how I would give you a drop-down of 640 items that would actually allow you to view 640 items. So I looked at a couple blog posts that had, here's top 10 Google fonts, here's top 20 Google fonts, best Google font pairings, things like that, and I kind of consolidated a list. Okay, here, and I put them out, and periodically I've added more as people have asked for them. And it's free. I put it up in the repository, and it was like, okay, for the people that want that, here it is. Have at it. But now I don't have to worry about making sure everything, the core isn't getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden I can't make any changes because there's so many moving parts. And there's a handful of other, small add-ons that I did to address those little pieces that some people wanted, because unless it does one very, very, very focused thing, there's going to be people that want to use it in different ways. And you can either ignore them, you can put everything in one bucket and be like, here's the bucket, and find the part that you want, or you can make a very lean core, create the add-ons and allow them to push it out, and from there, and then address those little weird one-offs without having to worry about, what am I managing now? Because at least in my experience, the larger something gets, the harder it is to manage. I mean, a lot of people like to complain about WordPress at times that they move slow, they don't add things cool, and they don't add a lot of cool stuff anymore. They still do things a certain way when other products do them much better, and people a lot of times forget is like, well, yeah, they don't necessarily move as fast as other products because they've existed a lot longer. They've been out for 10 plus years. They have to worry about the people that still have 3.0 installed. I don't know why. At times I even wonder, I'm like, why do they care about people that are using 10 versions back? But they do. And that's what they've made that decision to do, and I support that. Even though I don't always agree with it, I support it. They have to deal with people that are on hosts that may have old versions of PHP, so they can't use certain functions. That if everyone was on 5.4, they could they could rewrite they could rewrite all of it, but they wouldn't do that anyway. But I mean, there are parts of code that they could rewrite using a fourth of the amount of code that's there now. But there's still quite a large percentage of hosts that aren't even on 5.3 yet, mind you, 5.4. So these are all the things, so and that kind of boils back into the plugin space. I can't guarantee that everyone using it is going to have the most recent version of WordPress, is going to be on the most up-to-date, technologically, forward hosts. I can put in those disclaimers, like this only works with X and above, and you need to have but an average user has no idea what version of PHP they have. They wouldn't even know where. Actually, I built a plugin to figure out what version of PHP people have. It's in the repository. It's called System Snapshot. It was Pippin built part of it for EDD, and I took it and changed it and expanded it a bit because I was dealing with support issues and I needed to know about their actual hosting platform, and they have no idea what their host. They're like, here's the host that I have, and that's all they know. They know who they're paying. So I made a plugin that will make a big text file that they can email me, and now I know what they have. So now I can actually debug a problem. And that was one of those things. That goes back to the idea that I had a problem, I solved it by writing code, and then I released it. If nobody ever uses it, fine, I use it. Like, that's the only reason I released it, is because I use it. and apparently other people do too. But getting into that is, you got to deal with the larger scope, the larger set of what people can or can't do, what they want to do, and the business part. That's where it all comes down. Like, if you're a coffee shop, you sell coffee. Like, I'm a big fan. Clearly, I drink a lot of it. I have been to many coffee shops. I'll drink swill from a diner, and I'll drink really expensive fancy coffee made by a guy with a handlebar mustache. I don't care. I'll drink it. It's coffee. I have expectations based on where I go. With what I'm going to pay and what service I'm going to get, and I'm fine with that. Users in WordPress are walking in the door thinking free. That is their first mindset. WordPress is free. That may have been how they were sold on using WordPress over another platform. Like, WordPress is free. I like free. Plugins are free. I like free. Why do I have to pay you? Now all of a sudden you've now thrown in, you have to pay me for something. And from a business perspective, there's not a whole lot of businesses that can theoretically give you everything you want for zero cost. There might be others, but not that I know of. So and most developers, at least in my experience, are not good business people. I'm not. Before my wife took over the actual managing of the company, which surprisingly the company has done much better since she took over, I would forget to do things like invoice clients, or I would push client code live and then forget that I'd done it and forgot to tell them. I mean, it's funny, but I'm probably not the only person that's done that. Or I would have it done, written, email them, and then forget. And then email me back a week later, and I have no idea what I've written, because I've just been writing code nonstop, for the week after that. So, running a business on top of WordPress is difficult. Running a plugin business is difficult. And we'll get into some of the QA parts about how to do, I'm sure some people have very specific questions about how to do X, Y, or Z, and we can get into that in the roundtable. But for anybody who is in the business, I hope you're doing well. And that's not sarcasm. I really hope you're doing well, because there's a lot of space for a lot of improvement with things that I'm releasing, things that other people are releasing. There's still a huge potential to solve problems that people have, even in spaces that seemingly have been solved. I mean, I use Gravity Forms for a lot of stuff. There's a couple other form suites out there that are very good. And if Gravity Forms was that good, nobody would ever make a form plugin again. But that's not the case. People are still doing it. If WP Commerce or WooCommerce or whatever it was before they forked it, if that was the best, if that was all that everyone needed, no one would ever release anything else again. But there's still stuff coming out. If PayPal, and you can think of anything in this space, like if that were the best, nothing else would ever be released again. But there's never the best, simply because there's too many users out there. There are, just in Genesis alone, there's over 100,000 people using that theme framework. There's absolutely no way that you could build something that would address 100,000 people's concerns, needs, wants in one plugin. Impossible. If you can do it, frankly, I'd love to see how you think you could. So there's always going to be a group of people that your product will never, isn't good for. There's always a group of people who will not like how you do it. There's people that will think the fact that you're charging me money for it means I don't like it. And that will be their opinion. Oh, you're charging me money? I don't like it. Doesn't matter that, they're building a site in theory that is going to generate money for their company, and the $40 that you're asking for is a personal assault on them. I've seen some of the language that people use. It's hilarious. Only because they would never dream of telling other businesses that I'm not paying you, but they do it for us, and we have to deal with it. That's the nature of WordPress. So, at the end of the day, is there's still a lot of room in the space. It's not crowded. There's a lot of people, but it's not crowded. There's a lot of products, but there's not a lot of solutions. If you think you could do it, do it. Go home after this, good a time as any, start writing it. Start releasing it. Start putting your code in public. The biggest thing that made my development better was putting my code in public and letting people trash it. I didn't know how bad of a developer I was 5 years ago until other people started looking at my code and asking me why I was doing things certain ways. 5 years ago, there wasn't all the online teaching stuff that we have now. There wasn't code schools and boot camps and all this other stuff. Like there was some tutorials and there was source code, and that was about all you got. And I didn't know how badly I was writing things because they worked, and I didn't know any better. I was self-taught. So once I put my code in public, I started realizing, I'm not good at this yet, and there are people that are a lot better than me, and they are completely and willing to help me get better at what I do. Sometimes the criticism was a little harsh. I learned to deal with it, for the most part. Sometimes it was what they were saying I needed to do, I didn't understand. And so it basically was like a homework assignment. Like I need to figure out what they've told me to do before I can implement what they've told me to do. But it made me a better developer. And so putting your code in public, and GitHub's a great place to do that because you don't have to worry about having thousands and thousands of downloads and dealing with all that. You will find out how good you can make it, because I'll give you one example. People are familiar with Pippin Williamson. He's got, 8,000 plugins or something like that in the repository. He built easy digital downloads amongst other large things. He has written multiple patches for other e-commerce solutions that are direct competitors to what he builds. He has written them without any sort of fanfare, without any, he doesn't like broadcast the fact that, oh, look how good I am, I'm writing stuff for other, he doesn't mention it. I've only noticed it because I happen to be writing a patch myself and I saw his name. He feels that it's important enough for the entire ecosystem to do well, even if it means that someone's going to buy something that he didn't make. There's a lot of people like him out there, myself included, like David, like other people who if they see a problem, they see a bug, they will write the fix. They will show you, here's where it's wrong, here's why it's wrong, here's how to fix it. Or they'll say, here's where it's wrong, and here is the fix. All you have to do is click merge, and it's fixed. And you didn't have to do anything other than click merge. But you can't do any of that if your code's sitting on your computer. No one's ever going to see it if you're the only one looking at it. No one can tell you what's wrong with it. Because users won't. They'll just say it's broken. It doesn't work. They have no idea why it doesn't work. They don't even know if it's not even necessarily your code that's wrong. It's someone else's code that is now interacting with your code, and you're the last thing they installed, so inherently it's your problem. You put it in public, your business will get better. Again, Pippin Williamson just recently released another product called Affiliate WP. He felt that all of the affiliate things that were out there, none of them were good enough for what he wanted to do, so he built his own. Even though it is a paid plugin, the core of it is paid. It's not free with paid. The core is a paid product. He has it in GitHub, open. People can go look at it. People in theory can download it. He opened it up in such a way that he's like, yes, I understand now that people can go take the code, never pay for it, and use it. And he's like, the flip side of that is I had it in the repository. He's like, I had it in GitHub for 12 hours, and I got 14 pull requests. Pull requests is a patch of code to fix something. So 14 people who didn't work for him, who were not getting paid by him, fixed something in his code in 12 hours. That was before really, at that point it had been out for 12 hours. He may have had 10 sales. So he didn't have to worry about all of a sudden, I have all these people I need to update for. So putting it in public, even if I don't have anything paid out in public like that. He's the first person I've seen do that. But putting any of your code that you can in public is going to make everything you do with plugins better. It can be scary at times. It can be kind of weird and uncomfortable to, in a way, expose yourself like that. Because, design stuff is one thing. Like, I'm not a designer. Like, I don't know how to make things look pretty. And I know design's way more than looking pretty, but I don't know how to do any of it. But you can go look at something that is aesthetically nice. You can go to a website like, hey, this looks really nice. And assuming it doesn't take 10 seconds to load, you're like, wow, that's a cool website. You have no idea how well or how poorly the code is written on the back end of that site. No idea. Because it looks nice. And that's most users. It looks nice. You put your code out in public, people are going to see that function that you wrote that is incredibly ridiculous. They're going to see the fact that you did something in 12 steps that should have been done in 1. They're going to see that you rewrote something that clearly didn't need to be rewritten. All of these things are my own direct experience, the things that people have pointed out. And either I could sit there and be like, I don't want to have that happen to me. I don't want people to look at me like that. I don't want my ego, my pride and ego, basically, to take a hit like that. Or I could be, this is free education. This is someone telling me how to get better, who is better than me. They're clearly better than me because they've found something that I didn't know about. And I can become better, and what I release becomes better. So actually, I'm going to close with this. Who here has released a plugin somewhere? I'm not necessarily going to say the repository, but just somewhere. All right, who's purchased one? Who has not purchased one simply because it costs money? Fair enough. So, there's here's the range. There's the people that build them. There's the people that buy them. There's the people that use them. They're all sitting in one room. That's probably a pretty good cut of WordPress. There's about 4 people that raise their hand that build them. There's about 10 people that raise their hand that bought them, and I'm going to assume everyone else here has at least used them. If you have a WordPress site, you've used a plugin because 1 or 2 of them come prepackaged. So that there's your divide. There's your allocation percentages, whatever, of people who build, people who buy, and people who use. If you're thinking that you're going to get that huge chunk of people who use to buy, probably wrong. Probably not going to happen. If you want to get that large group of people, you're going to have to give it to them for free. That's just the nature of how it works at this point. If you want to find those people that are open to purchasing, first off, just right off the bat, they're at least open to it. Figure out what they need. Figure out what their problems are. Find out what's not happening for them. And if you want to just build stuff for other developers, there's probably about 5 or 6 plugins I've written that are only useful to developers. It will never be useful to anybody who doesn't write code. And it's simply because it was something that I needed and I kept using, and I'm like, I clearly can't be the only person that needs this, and I push it out there. Find those people. Figure out what they're doing. That's a hassle. Look at your, you've probably written, if you're a developer, you've probably written code to make your life easier because of some task that you just have to do over and over and over again. Put it out there in public. Throw it up somewhere. Because I'm sure that, like, for example, myself, I'm about to switch to Mac. Yeah, I know, and I just, no. But I'm begrudgingly moving to Mac.
No viruses.
I haven't had a virus in 10 years. So, but regardless, that's not the point. The point is that there's a whole scope of stuff that I'm going to have to do now that I don't know how to do because other than try to fix my dad's computer who's a Mac, I've never used one for any development work in my life. So now there's all these new tools, all these things that I know exist, but I've never touched in my life. And there's people out there, I know some of them are in this room, and across, via Twitter or somewhere else, that have already done and solved the problems I'm about to solve. And all I have to do is ask. Or I don't even have to ask. I just have to make a brief mention, and they are going to tell me whether I like it or not. That's been my experience. And the same goes for plugins. Look for what people are struggling with. Find out what problems you need to solve. Try to solve it. What you may find is that maybe there's a reason why it hasn't been solved. Maybe it's a problem that is the scope of the problem is so large that one plugin can't do it all. Maybe it's what people want to do is just not logical for what a website should do. I mean, again, it could be anything. But try to solve it. Try to figure it out. Anytime you start complaining about code, and if you're a developer, if you're not a developer, it's kind of hard. The whole idea of go write a patch. That's great for people like me and David and Zach and them, but everybody else, that's an insult. That's a way to tell them to go away, is how people view it. And so find users. Figure out try to get them to explain to you what the problem is. and then instead of turning around and telling them like why that version of PHP does something a certain way, just fix it. So anything beyond that, we'll do in the round table. I'm probably battling at this point, so we'll have questions later on. So thank you very much.
What characteristics would you say make an awesome plugin developer?
That's a good question.
The first one I would say is the ability to take criticism, the ability to take a user's needs, complaints, wants, what have you, and translate that into something development focused. Because again, what I mentioned earlier, like users, they don't do what we do. They don't know how to say, I need this function. I need that. They're like, I just want it to do something. And being able to figure out a way to not only build that, but build something that is not just so one focus, like it does the one thing you wanted, but it doesn't help anybody else. If they can kind of take those and do it. And then also, the best thing that I've seen on top of all that is if they know how to build plugins that play nice with others. They don't jack themes. They don't add their own user interface that doesn't match anything in WordPress. They don't make it so it's difficult to use other plugins. That they don't hijack scripts and things of that nature. That they respect what's already being run on the site.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's my big thing. Anytime it's the reason I have such. For those of you who've been in the group before, I haven't said very nice things about plugins in the past. And a lot of that just comes from, we installed this plugin because the client specifically requested it, and then it broke 3 other plugins on the site. Now we've got to figure out how to fix those. That playing nice with others thing is so important, because if you do it right, your plugin kind of does what it's supposed to do, and it doesn't touch anything else. And that way it lives in its own world, and you don't have to worry about it potentially breaking things down the road. So that way, if you do have to remove it, all those changes that you had to do to get those other plugins to work in result of that, you now have to go undo. And then you're introducing something else into the ecosystem, and it becomes a whole mess. And you've suddenly added 10 hours to your development that you didn't necessarily have. And if you're a freelancer, that's really problematic. If you're a company, it's not quite as bad, but it's still, that's extra work that you didn't really need to do.
Very well put. And I think the only thing to add to that is I think you just need to be a little bit fearless as well. A lot of the times you can test things on your local machine and run unit tests, things like that. But in the end, sorry about that, when you release your plugin, way more people are going to be testing it out on their sites, and there's going to be a problem every once in a while. But the fact is, like, no matter how much testing you do, there's going to be way more testing being done on as soon as you release a new version of your code. So I would say don't be afraid to launch, put an update out there.
Great point.
All right. So, looking at the current state of the WordPress plugin market, how would we improve it from both a developer and end user standpoint?
Are you talking about commercial or free or?
Let's go with commercial first and then free.
Okay. From a commercial standpoint, what I think would be nice, I'm not sure when or how it'll happen, but is some sort of vetting done by a third party. And I don't know if that third party would be the foundation or the .org team, kind of like what they do with plugin. They have some featured theme companies that they will promote on the site, on the WordPress site. I kind of wish they would do that with certain plugins as well. I also wish that, it would be nice to see a little more collaboration between some of the large plugins that people use for a lot of things. I know that there are certain plugins now that'll ask you, like, hey, can we send back data? Say yes. Like, I don't, from my own experience, like, I don't care about what you're writing about. I could not care less. But what I do care is that what plugins you're running, what theme you're running. Because if I see that the good scope of user, the good chunk of users that are using something I've written are using a particular plugin, I'm gonna make sure that that plugin is included in my test suites because I know that I'm gonna have to interact with it, and I won't know that if I'm not getting any data. So there's because if you go to the repository, the top 10 list hasn't changed in years, and probably won't. So there's really no other way of knowing what to test for without having actual user information. And if it's something breaks, you don't know what plugin is causing the problem. You just know that there's a problem. So, getting that information back would be fantastic. Some consolidated way of getting real user data.
I can. That's a great point, especially that last part. Nothing is more frustrating when you go, even as a developer, we install a plugin because we think it might work. It might be solving the problem that we needed to solve, and then it breaks something, and we go to the support forum, and the first thing that we're told to do is disable all plugins, and that doesn't help me figure out what's wrong. Especially like in this most recent instance where it happened, it was actually a custom plugin we wrote that was breaking everything. So we easily removed it, and we can fix that. But if it's somebody else's, like I said before, now we have to go through and figure out how to fix all of that. And some of them are free plugins, some of them are paid, and the paid ones, it's easier to get support. The free ones, it could be something that was written 3 years ago and no one's touched since, but because it still works, we use it. And that becomes a problem as well.
I don't have as much commercial experience, but I think one thing that can be worked on for the free model is better statistics. So a lot of times people will go to WordPress.org and they'll search for a plugin that does something. They'll see a big list and they're really not sure which one to pick. And when I'm talking to people about that, I just say, okay, look at the downloads, how many downloads there are, what the rating of the plugin is. But simply the amount of downloads does not really correlate to how popular the plugin is. People might download the plugin all the time, but that doesn't mean they're actually using it on their site. So there's other statistics such as like how many people are actually using this on their sites, and I think having a better way to search for what you're search for exactly what you're looking for. And I think there's been some big improvements in WordPress, and especially in the back end, where you can just search for and install a plugin right in the back end. And WordPress is working to make that experience a lot better. But I think that's just a work in progress, and yeah.
Yeah, when you're pulling plugins from the repository, the things that I always look at are twofold. One, look at the last updated date.
That's another.
Yeah. That's going to show you a lot more of how current it is, as opposed to, because the download count is misleading. That also includes updates. So the longer a plugin exists, the higher the number is going to get when you push an update. They've actually found this doesn't happen very often, but they have actually caught a handful of people here and there that were pushing out updates that didn't really update anything, but it forced a download, which increased the download count, which made them look more popular. Again, these were I want to say 2 or 3 that they found doing this, and they weren't that popular, and that's why they were trying to and they kicked them out. They got rid of the plugin. But look at the last updated. The ratings, those are harder because it used to be someone could just start and go along their way. Now you actually have to leave a review if you leave a star, which I think A is good because you don't get people just trying to drive by click stuff, but you get people that would leave an honest rating, but they don't have the time to actually type out a rating, or they don't want to have the time to type out a rating, so they don't. And then look at the support, see how often things are being responded to, see how many open tickets there are, and you'll get a better idea as to how well it's being supported, how many other plugins those people have, things like, kind of take a step back from that actual plugin and look and see who's involved with it. Is there one contributor? Are there 4? Is it someone who has 20? Is it their only one? And you can kind of go from there.
So, why are there so many abandoned plugins?
Support.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can think of, I've had 2 or 3. Third plugin I ever built was for Google Maps. Used to have these things called tours. I don't even know if they don't have them anymore. But it was a friend of mine who's a teacher out in California. He lived near Google, and he was brought in from a group of teachers, and they would make tours and they would use them in their classroom. and there was no way to embed it on the site. So I figured out, and I kind of dug through Google's undocumented API for this thing. It was a nightmare, and built a plugin for it. And I pushed out 1 or 2 small patches for it, but then Google stopped offering these tours. So I have abandoned that plugin, yet people still download it occasionally. I don't know why. I finally had them I asked them to just take it out of the repository. I'm like, because there's no need, this shouldn't exist anymore. There are plugins out there that have been replaced by core functions, so the people who made the plugins stopped supporting them because the need for the plugin doesn't exist. Beyond that, then sometimes it's a matter of, I don't have the time to support this anymore. I mean, I will be the first to admit that some of the ones that I have in the repository, like on my list of things to do and support, like they're towards the end just because of how much time I do or don't have. I have to make sure that I'm handling things for my clients, then I'm handling things for my customers, then I'm handling things for my family, then I'm handling things for random people who are taking things that I've given away for free. Like, they're lowest on the list, and it's not a slight on anything other than time is finite, and I only have so much of it, and there's only so much that I can do.
I know that's one of it's something I wasn't aware of for a long time, but now I've seen it being promoted a little bit more, is the idea of putting plugins up for adoption. And now that that's becoming kind of more to the forefront, I think we'll see the ones that don't get picked up will start to go away. But the ones that are, like, hey, I don't have time to support this, but if somebody else does and wants to take it and run with it, that's awesome, because then a product can continue to live on and still get, updates and actually be useful to people. But if it's not useful and nobody wants it, then we should probably just get rid of it.
And I think, other than support, I think one of the other really big reasons why plugins will get abandoned is that they're simply adding too many features to it. So if you keep on adding more and more features to it, it gets harder to maintain, and at a certain point, you just say it's not worth it, especially if it's a free plugin. You're not actually making money from it. You might have little links in there, and I've seen things where I had a nice plugin, and they end up just like, they don't care about it as much, and then all of a sudden you see a bunch of links pop up in the back end. So I think keeping your plugins really simple is very important.
And one thing is that the search in the repository, unless you are going to an actual URL, it will not show you plugins that have not been updated in 2 years or more. It will filter those ones out automatically. If you click on a link and it has not been updated, it will show you in yellow, warning, this hasn't been updated. Now, there's occasionally, it's because there's no need to. It does something so basic and simple that there is no need for an update because it does one little thing, and it's, but even then, a lot of times developers will just keep like the README updated, just enough. It doesn't prompt downloads, but it's just enough to keep the update, so people don't think that it's, way out there.
So in terms of current WordPress plugins, what are some that have been the most innovative in accomplishing their tasks or defining a new target market?
I still use Gravity Forms on all my sites.
Gravity Forms is probably the one plugin I think I absolutely can't live without.
Yep, can't do it.
Yeah, I renew my developer license without thinking about it.
I just did that the other day.
And and only because everyone needs a form. And I've never built a site that didn't need at least one form.
So what about Form 7 that's free on
It's a lot harder to customize. I'd rather pay for something that I know will do exactly what I want than try to fight with something that won't. And I met the developer. He's Japanese. He doesn't speak English, at least not very well. I met him in the community summit back in 2012. Super nice guy. Very limited English. Has a full-time job that is not related to WordPress. The fact that he is able to support that at all, considering the user base, blows my mind. And the fact that how much functionality is actually in that if you're willing to sit there and go through it, it does the job. Jetpack has a form thing now where if all you want is a basic form, and you're probably using Jetpack anyway, use the contact form that's built in Jetpack and you're done. But a lot of times when I'm building forms, they're way more complicated than just a basic contact form. Beyond that, I love EDD. I love the model that Pippin's built around it in terms of serving digital products. I like the way that he separated out the core, which is free, and does a lot of what most people would need it for. And then things like payment gateways, which are always tricky because there's so many of them, and they all want to do things their own little way. Instead of trying to jam 10 different payment gateways in there, there's a small add-on. Like, yeah, you're going to pay $30-40 or whatever it is for it. But if you're, like, anytime that I see people complaining about the price of a plugin when they're using it on a site that they're making money from, like, I can't reconcile that in my head.
No.
Like, at all. Like, it's like people who drive for a living complaining about having to buy a car. It's like, no, that's kind of how it works. You need to spend a little bit of money, and there's no other, like, if I go to, I don't build like physical things because I'm not that good at it. But my father-in-law, among other things, he does tile work. Like, he has $1,000 saws that he has to use. They're very specialized for the type of stuff that he does. And heck, he has $500 blades that cut certain kinds of stone. He does that work. He goes and buys that blade. He doesn't think twice about it. He maybe doesn't like spending $500, but he doesn't tell the guy, like, I can't, and like, no, you shouldn't charge me. It's just still, I can't reconcile in my head people that complain about paying for something when they're using it to make their own money. Like, if it's a free thing, maybe, but if you're using it to generate income, then you need to be okay with spending a few dollars.
So, what characteristics would make an innovative WordPress plugin?
It's really dependent on what it's trying to solve. I mean, like, for example, there's a plugin out now called Velocity Page. Mark Jakewitz is the main developer on it, and it is a page builder. Now, I myself have no need for the plugin. I don't do things like that. Like, I don't build a lot of sites like that where I need the ability to make, add pieces to pages. However, it does it in a really innovative way. It uses a lot of JavaScript backbone stuff, so you can go on your site in your theme, add pieces, and see this is exactly what it's going to look like. It's not, you're not guessing what it's going to look like. This is what you're doing is literally what you see is what you get. And it's a paid product, which I have no problem saying that is good. I mean, I know that it is good. I myself have no need for it. But he took something that had been done many times by themes, plugins, the whole nine, and said, what's wrong with the way these things are being done? Let's use some of the new stuff that's in WordPress now, a lot of it's JavaScript based, and make something that's easier to use. And I think the way he did it was extremely innovative because no one had done it that way yet. So I guess that technically defines innovative because he innovated a way to do it.
Yeah, I think that it's a problem that the word innovative is kind of thrown around a lot. I think it's almost become a marketing term. My wife deals with it. She's a teacher, and like they're always being told to, like, one of their standards now is to be innovative. And it's almost impossible to set innovative as a standard because if you're constantly innovating, you're really not getting paid enough because you're coming up with things that no one's ever thought of before. That's kind of what innovative is. And so really it's just coming up with an idea, like you said in your talk before, find something that somebody is already doing and see if you can find a way to do it better. Whether that's more efficient, cleaner code, just a better user interface, because Lord knows, if someone can please figure out a way to write a photo gallery plugin that doesn't suck, I'd really appreciate it. Because we have one client where we actually have 2 photo gallery plugins running on one site. One plugin just to run the back end because the back end is actually really nice to use, but their presentation on the site is terrible. So we had to use a separate plugin that hooks into that to handle the presentation so that it still looked good when you actually put the photos on the site. If someone could find a way to put those 2 together, and so I don't have to use 2 plugins, which means it's a whole mess of code that if one little thing goes wrong, one update could screw up both of them, I would be so happy, because that is the number one thing that drives me crazy is photo gallery plugins, because everybody wants photos on their website, and I haven't found an interface that actually is really user intuitive and also developer friendly.
And I guess I have a little bit of a different view on innovation, but my personal point of view is simpler, easier to set up. So when I install a plugin, I don't want to have to go to settings and deal with all a lot of these extra options. I just want to turn on my plugin and be done with it. And if you can do that compared to this other plugin who does the exact same thing, but you have to go to settings every single time, you've already made a much better plugin just
Yeah.
by doing that. So simplification is that's my personal piece of advice.
Yeah, when I'm building a plugin, my goal is for there to be no settings page.
Yeah.
If I can pull it off, then in the last 3 that I've done, there's on the free side, there is no settings page. There are no settings to configure. It does what it does, and that's all it does. And there are some hooks and filters and stuff behind the scenes, but there is absolutely no setting. So like what you said, it's a very simplistic, very focused, and I think the people that are innovating are taking these kind of nebulous, this plugin does things, does this for everybody, and saying, no, we're doing just this, and we're getting very focused and very fine-tuned, and it's going to do that one part of the market. It's going to do it better than anyone has ever tried to do it before, but that's all it's going to do. And we're going to keep that focus, which means we can make that part even better and better and better, because we're not trying to attract all of these other sides of the same, these pieces of the same pie. Because if you're trying to be something to everybody, you're not something to anybody. Like, you can't make everybody happy, so don't try. Just try to make one group of people very, very happy, and then you can end up building a better product.
Jump on that one point. The one thing I do worry about with this oversimplification of things is, and I'm a newer developer. I've only been doing this professionally for just over a year. The thing that frustrates me the most is if I Google something and like, I need to know how to do this, and the first 10 searches I come up with are use this WordPress plugin, use this plugin. That doesn't help newer developers. Like, we should be able to learn how to do like basic functionality, and it may be something it's not in core because it's not something everybody uses, but enough people request it. Well, that might be it's a good reason for a plugin to exist. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to use a plugin for it because it's something like, if it doesn't need a settings page, it just should just work. You don't want your client to have to think about it, so you just want to have it happen. And far too many times, and it's where my kind of overall general feelings on plugins come from, is I want to learn how to do something, and it says, just use a plugin for it. I mean, the talk I gave a couple months ago about keeping your databases clean, so many of the options I found were, just use this. But what if I actually want to know how to mess with the SQL tables, and I need to know what to look for, because I want to be able to monitor it more personally. It took me hours just to find what I'm supposed to be looking for, but if I wanted it done in 5 minutes, I could have just found a plugin for it. So that's where I worry that if we go too far down that simplification rabbit hole, that you're going to end up hurting those younger developers that want to learn, and they're getting stonewalled by this. Just use a plugin, because it's so easy in today's society but you can buy a thing that'll do that for you. To me, it's important to know how something is made and how to build it yourself.
And I agree with that, and that's how I learned how to develop.
Yeah.
Was I went and downloaded those plugins, and then I opened them. What is this doing, and how do I do it? Because I would do that, especially like when it comes to plugins. What I usually do is things like Gravity forms. They're always a pain. They're a pain to build by yourself. I can build them, and I have built them. And my rule of thumb is that if I can't build it myself, I won't use a plugin. Not that I will build it myself, but if I can't build it myself, then I will not use a plugin until I know. Because if the plugin breaks, I have to be able to step in and mimic that functionality. That's me as a developer and as handling clients. But things that have constant changes, not to WordPress, things like Google Analytics, I will always use a plugin because Google keeps changing things. And if I put this on a client site and I coded it myself, 2 years later, all of a sudden they're like, I don't have 6 months of analytics data. It's like, Google changed how they handle their scripts. I didn't know that, and now they're upset with me. So I'll always use a plugin for something like that because that will stay updated. Certain social sharing things, as much as I hate putting social buttons on sites, I really don't like putting them on sites, and there's a lot of studies that say they actually don't help engagement much. And they can even hurt it because people see low count numbers and they think that it's not worth sharing because they don't see people sharing it already. And they slow down your site by an average of 3 to 7 seconds. But I will a lot of times use plugins for that because the networks change how their sharing works. And they change the JavaScript. They change, so if you're embedding this stuff yourself, if they change how it works, then again, your stuff doesn't work anymore. And then you get a frantic email from a client saying, my site's broken. You know, it's not Twitter changed how their API works, it's my site's broken. And then you have to stop what you're doing and figure out why.
And
So,
even when you tell the client, I'm sorry, Twitter changed their API, they don't care.
not their problem.
So, now we're opening up the floor for questions from the audience. We'll start.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't think it was mentioned before, but how do you guys address security issues with free plugins? Specifically, the ones that could be out there that have vulnerability and are addressed in a timely manner that could be widely used. There's been a bunch in the past year that are widely used plugins that have security flaws, and by the time it actually gets out to the masses of users that are using it, they've all either been infected or had issues. How do you guys address that?
So these are not plugins that I have written. Like, I'm saying, like, me answering the question, like, it's not like I find problem with my code, it's somebody else's.
Yeah.
Well, first, what I do is I reach, if I find it before one of the actual security experts, guys like Jake with or security or those people, if they find, if they don't find it and I manage to, I will reach out first and be like, privately, never publicly, always privately. And it's not because, like, I want to hide things. It's like, usually, it's like, whenever I've told someone, hey, I found a hole. And usually they're very, like, esoteric, kind of, they have to, hold down the left lever while using their right, like a Goonies thing. Like, they have to hit these 3 keys and step in the left, to make it open. They're usually not huge gaping holes, usually. But they immediately fix it. Like, one time it was 45 minutes after I reported it, there was an update. And it was a very, very minor thing. Most people now that are building things, and that's why I usually look for people that, if I'm using a plugin, I look for people who have experience writing plugins before I use it. They know how to use proper sanitation and validation. They know how to set up their scripts properly. They know that, you don't just take field inputs without checking them first and validating them first. And you use things like security nonces, which is number used once. All this stuff's built in WordPress core. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are functions for there's functions for creating security keys, and then that will turn right around and check the security keys. It's already there. It's been there since 2.5. So beyond that, WP Touch was a big one that had a huge hole. And my whole thing with that is, like, I would never use that plugin. Not before the problem. It's like it completely makes a weird mobile site that only works half the time. And it worked fine for when people only had blogs and when there was no other mobile option and responsive web design wasn't really there yet. Now there's no need to use something like that. You should have a responsive site. But beyond that, it's you find the person who has the problem. If they're not responsive to fixing it, reach out to the actual security team at WordPress. I think it's security at WordPress.org. You tell them. There have been more than one occasion where they will go in automatically and deactivate plugins on people's sites that have very major security problem. If a major security problem comes up, and I'm saying major like can infect a whole network kind of thing, not, oh, you might get spam. I mean, like, legitimate security issues. They will give people like 12 hours to upgrade, and either they'll force an upgrade if there is a fix, or they will deactivate it from people's sites. They've only done that 2 or 3 times. But they have the capability to do that if there's something that's that big of a problem that it could cause widespread, issues. Like,
That's
Would you mind explaining or define the term vetting that you use?
like when I vet a plugin,
You were previously saying that proper vetting was appropriate for theme development. I just would like for us newbies here, if you could explain that term a little more, define it.
sure. When I'm vetting a plugin, what I'm doing is, obviously as a developer, I can look at the code and see what's going on. Like, I know that not everybody can do that. I understand that. But what I do is I look at, is it doing what it said it was going to do? Is it only doing what it said it was going to do? One of the things I look for in a plugin, especially ones that add anything to the front end, is, are they loading their CSS and JavaScript files in every single page? When the plugin doesn't function on every single page? Is it creating, is it hijacking parts of the theme when it shouldn't be? And sometimes it's a matter of, you don't find this nearly as much, but sometimes you find that the plugin is doing what it's supposed to do, but the theme is not written properly. Like there's always there's two sides to it. Is like where, now there is a problem. What's the cause? Is it I now introduce something that does it correctly and it exposed something that had been going incorrectly for a long period of time? Or is it this new thing is doing it incorrectly? From there, I look at who built it. I try to get a gauge for what their experience is, and not because someone new can't do it well. Like I'm not trying to say that new people can't do things. But I look at, are these, because there are people who release plugins simply to try to make money. Free plugins that have affiliate links, and that's their only purpose. And I will never touch any of those ever. If it adds a link to the front end of my site, I'm not touching it. I don't care if they let me turn it off. Like, I'm not going to use it. My site's not for their advertising. And beyond that, I look for, on the back end, kind of the same idea. Are they loading their CSS and JavaScript site-wide? There's no need for that. You only load it where you use it. A competent, and it doesn't have to be experienced, but a competent developer knows those sort of best practices. Like, you load your assets where you need them. You don't touch settings that have nothing to do with your plugin. Unless you need very, very particular structure, serialize your settings. Don't make 40, like God forbid you have 50 settings anyway, but let's just say that for some reason or another that's actually relevant. Don't store 50 individual items in a database. Store it one, serialize it. It's not hard to do. The WordPress settings API is difficult to use. It's kind of a bastard, for lack of a better term, and it's been getting better, but it ain't there yet. And so there are a lot of plugins that will handle their own saving of settings because the settings API is just not very flexible. And that I'm okay with, as long as they're doing things like data validation and things of that nature, where I know that they're doing it properly. So if it's going to be mission critical, get a developer to look at it who didn't write it. I mean, like, if it's that important, find somebody who is qualified to say, yes, this is good, this is not good.
And just to add to that, when you're working with plugins or trying to add new things or play around with things, just you should be doing this on all your sites, but just make sure you have a backup. Just have a backup plugin or something. Make sure you're backing up the files in your database, just in case something goes horribly wrong. You can back up from maybe a day ago, or for some people they only back up every week. So as long as you have that, you don't have to be as scared to play around with things. And then one other thing, touching on the security issue again, one thing that I really like to do when I'm searching plugins, if there's a plugin author I really like, I'll actually go to their profile page and I'll see what other plugins they have made. So there's I probably have maybe 10 developers that I really, really like. And not only do I know their most popular plugin, but I know all the plugins that they make. So generally, I feel pretty safe about using those plugins, and I know that they're very efficient and they're doing things the right way. So that's the best piece of advice I can give for dealing with security, making sure you're installing a good plugin.
The only thing I can add to that, what I always like to do is right after WordPress pushes an update live, I tend to look, because you'll see pretty quickly how a lot of your plugins look. You've updated WordPress and now all your plugins need updated. The ones that don't, either it works already and that's good, or you can see, because if you're just a user, you may not know that we get the beta versions weeks in advance. So we know we can start testing the plugins that we've worked. So if we know we need to make an upgrade, we can do that and have it ready for kind of day one or maybe day 2 or 3. But if it's been a couple weeks since an update and that plugin, on the repository, it'll tell you does it work with the current version of WordPress? And if it's not sure, to me that's always kind of a little bit of a red flag. It's not an immediate stop for me, but I'll at least do a little bit more digging as to why is it not updated yet. Because sometimes it's someone that just they don't have a lot of time, and that's fine. But if it's just someone kind of the lazy developer that they threw it out there and forgot about it, then you might not want to, because they may not even have paid attention to what the new updates did, and that could cause a problem, whether it's a security issue or just they're using a function that was depreciated, and so now they need to fix that, because if you activate it, then all of a sudden your site's broken. So
Our next question.
How do you go about like landing pages? What are the best practices for landing pages?
that's a very good question.
From a development standpoint, like that velocity page thing actually does that really well, and there's some other plugins that do it too. But usually it's a matter of it's looking different than your site, which means that you need to bypass the template logic, which can be done, but it needs to be done very carefully, or it bypasses everything all the time, whether you like it or not. And now all of a sudden your entire site's a landing page. But it's really looking at is your landing page just glorified content? Is it your site without a sidebar? Then make sure your theme has a no sidebar option and use that. Is it a completely different layout with different analytics and different tracking and different all that stuff? Then look at something like velocity page that allows you to bypass the theme to load its own pieces. That's one of those things where those things are great for that, but you need to pay attention, because those things usually that bypass the theme logic, they bypass all of it, which means it's by default, it's not loading your plugins that put stuff in the header and footer, like your analytics code. Because you can't say, don't do anything except for this one little piece. Like, no, you're either bypassing it or you're not. That's why I said it has to do it very carefully. So make sure that they are, make it a point to view your site, and this is really with any plugin or theme. Make sure you view your site not logged in, because there are certain things you're gonna see or not see. Like a good analytics plugin should never load for a logged in user, because you don't need to track yourself, and you shouldn't care how many times you come to your site. Most caching plugins will disable themselves when you're logged in. The idea being that you are making changes and you are doing things, and you want to see the changes as they happen. So come to your site like a viewer, come with a different browser. If you use Chrome, load it in Firefox, only because you won't have all those cookies and everything else that are probably going to be in your browser. Load it from a different computer. Check it out as a user sees it, not being logged in, and then you'll see how well or how not well what you're running is working.
Yeah, if you develop on a Mac, load it on a PC, because pixels are handled differently. We run into that problem all the time where we set a font size and then it looks great on my Mac, and then we load it on a Windows 7 machine, and all of a sudden I'm like, why does none of these elements fit? Now everything's all over the place, and we just got to go back in and tweak. Even it's little CSS tweaks, but being able to see it in different environments, like if you're using a responsive plugin, which but if you absolutely have to, load it on an iPhone and then load it on an Android, and actually load it on a couple different kinds of Androids, because they're all different. So that way you'll know whether or not it's actually doing the job it's supposed to be doing, because it may look awesome on your iPhone, but that's because they coded it for iPhone. And then you load it on your Android, and all of a sudden nobody can read your content, and the pictures have disappeared. That's a problem. So that.
Yeah.
But yeah, don't use plugins for responsive design. It's a bad idea.
And when I'm developing sites, a lot of the time, what I'll do is I'll just pull up my phone and check out the site on my phone, even if it's not a responsive site. I just feel like, just check it out on the phone. Why not? I could open a different browser, or the tool that I use is Browser Stack.
Yep.
And it just basically connects to a server somewhere that has all the different operating systems installed, and all the different browsers installed, and different browser versions installed. And you just pick your settings, and then you can view the site with those settings. So it's a little bit easier than setting up a virtual machine.
Yeah.
Don't want to deal with that personally.
Is that a website?
Browserstack.com.
It's a service. There's a low monthly fee, but if you're doing any sort of web development, it's totally worth it, because you can say, look, give me this site in Firefox, Internet Explorer 8, Internet Explorer 9, 10, 11. You can say, give me every version of IE. 7, I think it goes back to 5.5, which was the version that was the default browser on Macs for a long time, because Safari was that bad.
Yep. And I honestly, sometimes I'll go to Browser Stack and just try the oldest version of IE I'm just curious
to see
how
how bad it
horrible
looks.
it is. I personally, I only support like the 2 latest browsers for the most part. Usually beyond that, it's a little bit extra. Sometimes I go a little further back for IE, but IE 6 and 7,
Nope.
not
Nope.
so much,
No.
not
Won't
so
touch
much
it.
anymore. Yeah, 8 is about as far as I go. As far
And even
back as I
that's-
go. Even that's going away
Yeah,
now.
that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, with that I make sure that they get their display, but they're probably functionality they're not going to get because IE doesn't support it.
Yep.
I do want to get back to your initial question was about landing pages.
Sorry.
The landing pages, kind of in general, are this weird. It's becoming a new thing, and it's something we at Highforge we've fiddled with it a little bit. Where I was trying to make a plugin for all these landing pages that we were doing, and I quickly realized it's a terrible idea. And the reason is, if you really want to do a landing page right, if you're really focusing on your marketing, you want that. Because we deal with a lot of different sites. A landing page should be very specific. A lot of research has shown don't include navigation in your landing page, or at least the same navigation that's on your site, because then it's not a landing page, it's just another page on your site. But also it should be very focused into what you're trying to sell that particular product or service on. So your design's going to be different. So to template it, then very quickly, if you let's say you have 3 different landing pages for 3 different products, if they all are the same layout, but maybe you tweak the colors a little bit, but really the difference is the pictures and the copy, then people catch on to that pretty quick. And that's why, like, the landing pages that we ended up doing, for one, it works if you're almost developing a custom plugin just for that site. Like the company that we worked with, they have they wanted a landing page for like the 50 different cities that they work in the United States. That makes sense because it's really the only thing that is changing is the copy, because only people in Chicago are going to see the Chicago page and only people in Dallas are going to see the Dallas page. But if you're selling products that everyone is going to see, it's a whole different ballgame. And that's why I don't like the idea of it. I don't like templates in general. I'm kind of more of maybe it's the artist in me. But I don't like to see stuff that always kind of ends up looking the same, because I'm of the opinion that people are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. So they're going to catch on to that stuff, and then they realize, hey, I'm being sold to, and I don't like that, because that's becoming a thing now where people don't like they're catching on to the sales pitch a lot sooner. So to me, it turns people off, and then you actually have done a whole bunch of work and you don't get any reward for it, and that, to me, that's never good.
Yeah. My only note on landing pages is do a little bit of A/B testing.
Yes.
That's always worth it. But basically, all that is where you look, like maybe the button says "Buy Now" compared to "Learn More," so you just swap out that piece specifically and see what the conversion rate is. Compare the conversion rates. There's WordPress plugins that do A/B testing. I don't remember any of the names off the top of my head, and Google Analytics does
Yes.
it, right? Okay, so and Google Analytics does it as well. So that's just something to try out.
To touch a little bit more on landing pages, recently I ran across the new Rainmaker platform. There's a feature in there how they presented landing pages where you can select different options for it. But one thing that usually we tell our clients is, what is the purpose of this page? Much like your website, what is the purpose why you're creating this landing page? Once you nail down the idea of what the purpose of that page is, you're able to lay out your content a whole lot better. Because if, for instance, you're selling a panini maker, you're going to know that, hey, this panini maker, they want to see the picture of it. They most likely want to see how the panini looks after it. And now you have an idea of how to lay out your content, or how to even develop the landing page for your content. And like, Adam said, templates, they're one of the things that I kind of hate with a passion. And working at a lot of companies that have done a very templated approach, you'll end up with 200-300 sites that all have the same layout. People realize these things whether they're browsing here in Orlando or in California. They want to feel as if they're special in their online experience. And that's something that helps from not just on the branding standpoint, but also you being able to kind of update your content on a very regular basis. You're able to actually invest proper time and resources into it, instead of just kind of doing a drive-by and say, hey, I just have this content, I have this template, I'm gonna pump it out to 200-300 places, and then my job's done. In the end, you're gonna end up hurting yourself a whole lot more than you end up helping yourself in the end. We have time for a few more questions. Anything from design development? Yes?
So obviously you don't like gallery plugins.
Nope.
It's
not that I don't like the concept. I just haven't found one that does the job.
Right. So what do you guys think are some different markets that are prime for disruption for WordPress plugins besides gallery plugins?
I would say that any space that has a large number of different use cases is prime for at least taking a part of the niche. Because, like, for example, the gallery plugins. The reason why you probably don't like gallery plugins is you haven't found one that presents it the way you want it to look.
Exactly.
Which is perfectly a valid reason not to like it. But I'm guessing that if everyone wanted it to look the same way, they would exist. And the problem is that no two people want the same gallery. Some people want tiles, some people want one with small, some people want loading in Lightbox, some people don't. Some people want them to slide, some people want them to I mean, like, the list goes on of how many different ways someone could want the idea of a gallery. And trying to develop something to hit all of those is very difficult. So, things like, media management is probably kind of a high level idea of there's WordPress in the last 2-3 versions have added a lot of audio and video capability natively that it never used to have. The way it works now is like a lot of the embed stuff, which does anyone here even know what the word embed means? Okay, one person. If you take a YouTube URL, not embed code, just the URL, put it in your post, it will render the video. You can do, and there's a huge, it's embed, O-M-E. Yeah, it's like, I'm like the O threw me off, but yeah, the letter O and then embed. Look it up in the WordPress Codex. It lists all of the services that offer this. There's audio that, like, you can put a Spotify playlist and it will let people listen to music via Spotify on your site. And there's a whole bunch of these. And so there's now a lot of capability for adding audio and video that didn't used to exist. You can now put in just a raw MP3 and a player will show up automatically. You don't have to run all these plugins to do these things anymore. You just put the link there and it works. So,
Does it show the movie itself? Comes up on it? Or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and also, how about if it's an audio recording? What happens then?
You get an audio player. Kick play, yeah, all that stuff. It's built in.
And just by putting what?
Just the URL of the file itself. If it's like a third party, like say it's a YouTube or Vimeo.
That you made yourself?
Yeah, you upload it to your site or to something like Amazon or some other place. And just put the URL. You don't have to wrap it in a player. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You just put the URL and it will play. Assuming the browser using it can support it, which is for
the most part, you're good.
Yeah, and even then, I think they have some Flash fallbacks
Yeah.
for older versions of IE. So, from a disruption standpoint, frankly, it's not a matter of disrupting; it's a matter of doing it well.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think more and more WordPress users are coming around to the idea of paying for something because they know they're getting the support behind it. They know that, they're going. If something goes wrong, someone's going to answer. People are now getting to the point where they're like, that's worth my money. They don't know if the code's any better. It could not be. But they know that if and when something goes wrong, someone's going to tell me why, and someone's going to hopefully tell me how to fix it. And so you could take a popular free plugin. Now, don't just take it and sell it. That's being an asshole. But
it happens more often.
It happens a lot. But take the concept, build it in a better way, or even cleaner way, a little more streamlined, and then make sure that the support behind it is there, and then you're good. I mean, that's really all that needs to happen. Is you need to support it way more important to support it than it is to code it.
As far as disruption goes, I think there's a couple ways to kind of define it, but I think one idea that I like is that a lot of features that are being introduced to WordPress core or changes that are happening to WordPress core are being introduced through plugins. So people will say, I have this idea of how the WordPress admin should run. So they'll change things
That's a really good point.
change the way the media works, change the way widgets is actually a big one that I think is kind of constantly changing right now. Theme previewer, things like that. So you can actually make a big effect on WordPress itself affect thousands of or hundreds of thousands of sites just by changing something in the back end, making it a little bit easier for the user. Now, as far as a tool or the kind of plugin that I think allows you to create something very customized and kind of create something that's set up for a niche market, I actually have a hard time finding these plugins, but just good CPT plugins. So a lot of sites will have an about page on their site or about our team, and they'll list their team members, and they'll do that in a certain way. And usually it's very customized, so that's why it's very hard to find a good CPT plugin. But yes, quick question. There you go. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Custom post type.
Custom post type. Essentially, you know how you see posts and pages on the side in the back end of WordPress. You can, by adding a custom post type, it allows you to make a new section. So it could be like team members, and then like just like how you go add post, you can be like add team member. So this is what I do to almost all my sites actually, to give the user a very customized experience and make it very easy to maintain their site. Now, I build a lot, and this is pretty easy to set up, but I actually end up building that by hand almost every time. And I think it's kind of needed right now, but at the same time, I'm trying to look into creating some good CPT plugins. And so I think there's a lot of room to grow there. And I think if everybody started using the same CPT plugins for certain things, like it would make a lot of developers' lives a lot easier.
And
Personal opinion.
And that's the thing. Like you'll run into spaces where developers disagree. Like I would never touch a custom post type plugin in my life.
Same way.
Yep.
And not because I don't like plugins, but because if I'm adding them, I want them done exactly the way I want them. And there are enough ways to configure a custom post type that you would have to add 34 settings for each post type. And 90% of people who would install a plugin do not know what they mean. And then you could really mess things up because you're given this capability to change things that you're not familiar with. Like that FAQ plugin that I talked about, that is custom post type. If you installed it, you would see FAQs on the side. And I use them all the time for client work because it segments out what needs to get entered. So there's no confusion about, instead of having 80 pages, your pages are actually just pages. If it's FAQs, you have an FAQ section, team members, whatever it is, like they're all in their own spot. They're stored in the database exactly the same way. They're queried exactly the same way. If you don't add anything new to your template, they're displayed exactly the same way. Template logic allows you to make a different part of your theme to display a post type differently than a regular. And then the name is kind of weird. A post is a post type. A page is a post type. I wish it were called custom content types. That would have made a lot more sense. But I'm not in charge of such things. So remember that until version 2.5 or 2.4, WordPress did not have pages either. They only had posts.
So painful.
So everything started as a post type because there were only posts. Something that every now and then I have to remind myself is that certain decisions were set a long time ago, and they have to be maintained because that's just how, like, the very bare bones logic in WordPress has been written. And it's not just a matter of making a change. It's everything is chained off of this one thing, and you just flat out, you can't change it anymore. Like you're stuck with it, good, bad, or indifferent. So yeah, things like that. Like there's people that want plugins. There's people that would only want to do it themselves. And like I write a lot of my own code. Like I kind of fall back to, if I can't, because especially if it's a client site and I'm maintaining it, I want to know how it was written. I want to know how it's going to work. If it breaks, I want it to know that it was my fault. I will feel a lot better knowing my code failed than somebody else's. because if it's mine, then at least I can be like, well, it's my fault because I did something, and it's not. I can't believe they pushed out an update like that and broke my stuff, and you know, so I can only if I can only blame myself, I'll get over it a lot faster.
And to add to that, that's part of pretty much the exact reason why I use custom post type plugins internally for the most part, because I understand exactly how those work. I just wish there was a world where there's you could just have one CPT plugin and everybody would come together and say, you know what, let's all use this one CPT plugin. And I think definitely a long way from doing that, but it's something to think about.
Anybody else? Anything else?
I got some smart people in front of you right there.
Anything about visual editors?
I don't use them.
I hate them.
Yeah, I don't usually.
They're, I mean,
Well, they're not going to.
well, I mean, it's one of those things that they're inherently built for. They try to write code for you, and anything I've ever used that writes code for me doesn't do it correctly. Not me being a purist. It's trying to interpret you as a user doing something, and so it adds a lot of extra markup. Like if you've ever taken something from Microsoft Word and pasted it and not paid attention, now that's not just Word, that's actually Google Docs as well.
Yeah.
Because every word processor you use is actually a miniature browser, and it's rendering markup that you never see. So once you put it in an editor, now you see all that markup that always exists in your Word document. You just never see it because it's built that way. So that's what a visual editor does. It adds 14 spans to 2 words because you highlighted it, made it bold, decided, oh, I don't want that bold anymore. So instead of it being smart enough to go and release the bolding that you added, it just adds something on top of it to unbold what you just bolded. I wish I were being hyperbolic. That's actually what they do. That's what they're built to do. So I would never touch one.
They're more complicated than Inception was. That's the best way to put it.
If you've ever pulled open code from like a Weebly website,
Oh, God.
you'll
right.
cry tears that you never knew you had. I have recently.
Sorry to hear that.
It is okay. Here's one, I guess we can close out with. Plugin or functions file?
There's no difference. WordPress will load a functions file in your theme and a plugin exactly the same way. There is no better or worse. The difference is, I do firmly believe that it should be your theme is for presentation and plugins are for functionality. That being said, those lines blur at times because there's times where functionality can't do anything without a display, and there's sometimes where a display can't do anything without functionality. And yes, you could really go esoteric and write template tags for your own code and then use your own template tags. But I mean, most of the time, yeah. What I usually do is if I'm building a theme, I keep a library folder inside the theme, and I will have anywhere from 3 to 8 additional files. And each of those files have functionality tied to the type. One of them is called types, one of them is called meta, one of them is called admin. And if it's something to do with the admin, all of the functionality goes there. If it's something to do with custom post types and the related things you can do with that, they're in a separate file. Usually my functions file is only for what loads on the front end of the site. Everything else is sectioned off because that way I can make sure that I only call certain things on the admin, things like that, but also so I can keep things very segmented and add, remove. If I know that I have a file that's causing me a problem, I can disable that one file from loading, figure out the problem while the rest of the site still works. The other idea and kind of the subway of that is like how many plugins should you run in your site? You should not run poorly written plugins. You could have 100 plugins, and other than your admin UI probably loading a little slow on the plugin page, there's no problem running 100 plugins if they are properly written. One poorly coded plugin will ruin your site without, slow it down or worse because it's poorly written. It has nothing to do with the number of plugins you're writing. It's how well or not well they're written.
I think adding to that just a little bit. I think the big thing that sticks out in my mind is, should it be in the theme or should it be in the plugin? And just like Andrew was saying, it's presentation versus functionality. And I think a good example of that is, just to get a visual in your head, is the custom post type example. You have, a couple extra sections on the side. In my personal opinion, that should always be in a plugin, because if somebody has these different sections on their site and they decide that they want to switch their theme down the line, they switch themes and all of a sudden all their content's gone. Or if that theme breaks and they can't figure out how to activate it again, and they're not running backups on their site, all of a sudden they can't get to any of their content again. So if you have your, in a lot of cases it does make sense. If somebody's hiring you to make their whole site from scratch, you can honestly do almost everything from the theme, and it actually makes more sense at times because you understand everything. And if you're only going to be the only one maintaining it, then that's not necessarily a bad idea. But as far as releasing things to the public or to putting something a plugin on WordPress.org, or for anybody else, any random person who wants to download it, I think that's something to keep in mind. And definitely just plugin, making sure plugins work well together. And if you're and I think like one last example, Gravity Forms, for instance, is very much a functionality kind of tool. But at the same time, a lot of people don't know how to work with the CSS for forms on their sites. So in their main settings page, they have a little option to say, do I want to use, or would you like to use Gravity Forms CSS, or would you like to use your own CSS? So,
which I love.
So what I'll do is I'll uncheck that a lot of the times, because I have a lot of my own rules, and I've already set it up so that it works well for me, and that's one less CSS file that I'm loading on my site. Of course, this is very, very nitpicky, and this is also creating a situation where you have plugin options, but that's I think it's something to think about. And for me, Gravity Forms has to have that settings page. I don't know what I would do without it.
Yeah, I turn it off all the time because their CSS is written in such a way that it will always work on themes.
Yep.
Because so many theme developers don't add all the CSS for form entry.
Yeah,
that's why they have to do it the way they do, is because they have to make sure that they cover all their bases. But you, knowing well enough, you can turn it off. You got your own. The other thing you can do is, I do it a lot of times, like a core functionality plugin, where on a client site I will build a theme. I will build one or sometimes more, but usually one plugin that has things like custom post types and certain asset loading. That those are going to be there regardless of whatever happens with the theme, because the content doesn't actually disappear. It's still in the database. There's just no way to access it anymore. So, I'll do that, so that way if the theme breaks or they switch themes, their stuff goes away. It doesn't go away. But what you can also use, there's something called a must-use plugin. Now you have to know how to do this. It's not something you can just turn on. If you make a folder in your content, in your WP content, called mu-plugins, and then you put a plugin in that folder, not a folder, but just the actual, like a PHP file, it will always load. There is no way to turn it off unless you remove the file. I will use that at times if there's a piece of functionality that I've written that is absolutely critical to the site. Like if this functionality doesn't exist, the site won't work. I will put that there so nobody can disable it. Because if they accidentally disable their plugins and now their site breaks and now they can't get back into their site because they turned something off, and it's always there. And you just make that folder and then you pop it in there, and that will load before all other plugins. And but that's something that's more developer focused, because you need to be aware that you are now making something absolutely 100% loaded every time, all the time, whether you like it or not. So, like, that's something you use very sparingly, but that is an option if you're worried about people turning something off, and you know that it's absolutely critical. You can put it there.
One question. David, you mentioned Gravity Forms. Do you want to go over some of the more popular types of forms that you are developing for the sites that you work with? What are these forms accomplishing?
Generally, people want a contact form in the footer, at the bottom of every single page on their site. So I'll just use that. and then the contact page. Generally, those are the two standard things that I do. And then, but what's really nice about Gravity Forms in particular is that I can. They have an option so that you can export settings, and I think a lot of plugins do this. Some better than others, but I think it's pretty hard to mess that up. But a lot of the times I will say, oh, I've done that kind of a very similar form, and I'll export the settings. And I think there's that you could talk about that for a long time. So if I have, if I have a form, a really long form that's maybe 20 different entries, and I know I want that exact same form on a different site, I can export that form and import it into another site, and then it's already done. So
the same way you would export a post, or even sometimes if you needed to a page, it works the exact same way. Another really nice thing about Gravity Forms, I don't know if any of the other form plugins do it, is Gravity Forms will allow you to set up your form so that it actually creates the fields for your custom post type, which is really helpful if you're trying to set up reviews. Because you can actually create a custom post type for a review and have a customer fill out a form on your site that immediately creates that review, so that you don't have to then go in, like, you've collected all their information and now you have to go and put it into this something that's on inside your admin. It'll do it for you. We've done that a couple times.
I've got a form on my site that does potential client intake that automatically feeds into our internal project management tool. And so, like, again, like anything you could do with a form. I mean, like, again, this isn't the Gravity Form show, but we could
do an entire week.
If it's data that you would be collecting from someone, irregardless of what kind of data it is or how the data gets presented, Gravity Forms can do it. I mean, if you got any more questions, we can chat afterwards. We got to wrap this up. So, stop talking.
You can.
We're gonna wrap up now. However, if you do have extra questions, feel free to ask any one of the panelists here or the organizers. And I believe David has a few things to say in closing.
Thank you all for coming. Come next month. That's it.
Yeah.